this definitions, these examples. So if you did not get that done yet, you can find this on Schoology, this rubric. And after we do our examples, you can go back and finish that up if you need to. Okay. This is just going to kind of have a weird border on it, just an FYI, but that's okay. All right, so we're going to do 4 examples. 1 from G1, 2 from G2, and then 1 from G3. So if you want to write these down, you can. As I was walking around, it looked like some of you were writing examples already. You found examples from your notes. Ignore that, sorry. Okay, so if you are someone that you used your notes and you wrote examples already, you might not need to write these, or there might be a certain step that you're like, oh yeah, I forgot to write that step down. Okay, so it is up to you. All right, so for this first equation, it solves the equation by graphing. So this is from G1 with that graphing idea. Okay. When we're graphing, if we see this equal to, we're going to ignore that equal to just for a little bit. So I'm just going to kind of box that, set it aside. We're going to ignore that just for a little bit. Okay. What's our first step when we graph something? What do we want to find? What point in the graph do we want to find first? The vertex, the x of the vertex, yep. So we're going to find the vertex. So to find that vertex, it's x equals opposite of b over 2a. That was something you should have had written on your sheet already. If you didn't, make sure you write that down, that formula. Opposite of b over 2a. Okay, those of you at home, you should be doing this with us, hopefully. IDK. All right, so in this equation, what is our b? What number? 16. So what's opposite of 16? Negative 16 over 2 times the a. That 2 is always there. And then what is our a? Negative 2. So we can do that by hand. If we were going to do it by hand, we want to do that bottom part first and do that 2 times negative 2. So what is 2 times negative 2? Negative 4. And then negative 16 divided by negative 4. Anyone? No. 4, yep. If you want to use your Desmos calculator, that's okay too. If you use your calculator, you want to make sure that 2 and that negative 2 are on the bottom together. So negative 16 over 2 times negative 2. And that would give you that 4 as well. Okay, so no need to feel like you have to do it by hand. Whoops, I didn't want that over. So a little bit. All right, so now that we have our vertex, what's our next step? What do we do with that 4? We're going to make a table, our XY table, input output chart. And do we want that 4 to be in the X column or the Y column? The X, and do we want it at the top, the middle, or the bottom? Middle. Good. The vertex happens in the middle of our graph. It's where it's at the top or at that bottom. Okay. And what's going to go above 4? Sure. 3 and 2. And below 4 would be 5 and 6. My last class did 5 and 6 above it and then 3 and 2 below it. That's totally fine. Just however you do that, you do it your way. So those are the X's. How are we going to find our Y's? What do we do to find those outputs? Yeah, plug them into the equation up here. So anywhere where we see that x, we're going to put in those numbers for our x's. So we're just going to use our Desmos calculator, and we're going to do -2, parenthesis, and then what do you guys want to use for our first x? 2? You guys want to just start at the top? Sounds good. Okay, some people, what I'm noticing on the test, they're forgetting the squared. It's x squared, so make sure you get that squared in there. Okay, plus 16 times, and then we have another x. So for our x, we decided we were going to use 2 minus 28. So when we put in 2, we get out -4. And then we're just going to repeat that process for all of those x's. What's nice about Desmos calculator, we can just delete the 2 and put in 3. So now with that 3, when we put in 3, we get out a +2. Okay, after 3, we put in 4. And that's our vertex, remember. So we put in 4, we get out 4. And now this is a good spot for us to check. This is why I know some people have been forgetting that squared, because they're calling me over during their test saying, hey, this isn't working. Because what should our next point be? 2. It should be a 2. These should match. Okay, that's kind of a good indicator if you're doing it right. We do want to double check it though. So I actually put it into our calculator. Oops. There we go. 5. We put in 5. Yep, we get 2. So that probably means we're doing it right. What do we want for that last number? Good, we want that -4. And again, that's just a good way to check to make sure what we're doing is right. 6. 6. Yep, we get -4. All right, now that we have the table, what's our next step? Just graphing it, right? Okay, so step 3 is to do that graph. I'm just going to put a 3 there. I know you guys don't have a graph on your paper, so you can just sketch this. I know most of you know how to plot points, if not all of you know how to plot a point. So if you just want to do a quick sketch of this, it doesn't need to be perfect by any means. Okay, so 2, -4, from the origin would be right 2, down 4. On the test, this is the one that you're going to draw on the test, and there'll be a graph there for you. Okay, so if you just need to do a quick sketch, you do that. 3, 2 would be right 3, up 2. 4, 4 would be right 4, up 4. And then that's that vertex. So now we should see that coming back down on the other side. It's 5, 2, so right 5, up 2, and then 6, -4. And again, that makes that parabola, it's that U-shaped graph. Does this parabola have a minimum or a maximum? Maximum, good. If you can answer that question, that's like 2 points on the test. You're already doing great. Why is this one a maximum? Good, it's the highest point, or it comes up at the top there. Good. All right, so this is going to be one question. This next part is going to be like a separate question on your test. We're just combining them for this one pager. Okay. This one, it asks us to now solve the equation. So that's where we're going to take that -4. Okay, we're going to go back to that. When it says equals -4, is that an input or an output? It's an output, because it's like equals part. So it's coming out of the equation. It's an output. So is the output an x or a y? The y, yep. So for this one, when we look at this, we're going to look at -4 on that y-axis. So on my y-axis, I'm going to go down to 1, 2, 3, 4. If you didn't label your graph with those numbers, you could draw this line and then maybe just write a -4 by it so you know that that's where that came from. Okay. How many times does that intersect our graph? 2. So we know we're going to have 2 solutions. And for our solutions, we want to know what the x's are. So when I look at those points, I want to know what is the x of those points. So for this first one, what is the x coordinate? 2. Yep, we go up to that 2, so x equals 2. And then the other one would be x equals, it hits here, so that's at 6. Okay, so that's going to be kind of a separate problem on your test. The graph is already going to be drawn for you, and then it's going to just ask you to solve it. Okay, so one question, you're actually going to do the graphing, and then the separate question, you're going to be doing that line. Okay, I'm going to give you a helpful hint here. Maybe listen. Maybe important on your test. If you had a line that was above here, if we had x equals 5, if it was 5. Okay, let's say it said equals 5. We would draw it at that 5. How many times does that hit your graph? 0 times. So when it does not touch your graph at all, good. No real solution. So if you need to make a quick note of that, maybe make a quick note that if it's above that graph or if it's below, if it doesn't touch your graph, it's no real solution. Alright, so that was from G1. That's probably our longest problem. Remember, G1 was a little bit more challenging than G2 and G3. Okay, so for G2, we started off with the zero product property. And we started off with equations that look like this. So we have 2 separate parts that we're multiplying, and it equals 0. And our goal is to solve that equation. Okay? So to solve this equation, what am I going to do first? What would I write down to start this problem? Good. 3x plus 4 equals 0, and then x minus 7 equals 0. Remember that zero product property says that if we have 2 things that multiply to 0, either the first thing is 0 or the second thing. So we're just breaking it up into that first and second part. Okay, and then all we have to do here is solve those equations. Our goal is to find x. So for some of you, you might just need to write this problem down and then write this. And then you're going to be like, okay, I know what to do. You might not even need to finish that problem. If it was my one-pager, it would really bother me to not have a finished problem. So I would definitely finish it, but it's up to you. So for this red one, 3x plus 4 equals 0. What are we going to undo first? Good, we'd get rid of the plus 4. So how do we undo an adding 4? Subtract. So we get 3x equals, and what's 0 minus 4? Good, Shmarky. -4. Good. Okay, and then how are we going to undo that 3? Good, divide. So in this problem, is it easy to divide -4 by 3? Do we get a nice integer, a nice whole number? No. So we're just going to leave it as a fraction, -4 over 3. You got it, Shmarky. You're doing great. All right, and then we're going to solve that green equation. So to undo that -7, all we would have to do is a +7. And we'd end up with the answer, x equals 7. Now, if we want to write this really nicely, What word would we write between those two answers? Good, an or. So x equals -4/3 or x equals 7. All right, we're going to do one more problem from G2. So the second part of G2 was we had to find those two parts. Those two parts weren't always given to us. And in order to find those two parts, we used factoring, where we use that like box, the area model. Okay. If you need to use two sides of your one pager, that's okay if you're running out of space. Or if you feel like you don't need this, that's okay too. Okay, so on this one, it's not equal, we don't have those two parts. Okay. When we factor, though, we want to use that zero product property. So what do we want it to always equal? 0. Okay. So you might want to make a note here by factoring. If you wrote down factoring, maybe make sure you write it's always equal to 0. So to get this equal to 0, how am I going to undo this side? How would I get rid of this adding 2? Subtract 2. And on this side, what would I subtract 2 from? Good, the 12. Those are like terms. And then in the same step, I'm just going to do that 5x squared because, I don't know, I just don't want to take time to do it 2 times. So how would I get rid of a positive 5x squared? Good, just a minus 5x squared. We're going to keep that whole thing. And on the left side, where am I going to subtract that from? 7, yep. Because it's an x squared, so we want it to go with the x squared. So what is 7 minus 5? 2. So 2x squared. We're going to keep that 9x. Nothing's happening with it, so it's just a minus 9x. And then 12 minus 2. So sometimes, depending on the problem, you might not have to do that. You only have to do that if it's equal to something other than 0. All right, now we're going to go through and factor. So to start with factoring, we're going to do that multiplying equation and that adding equation. What two numbers are we going to start multiplying by? What times what? Good, 2 times 10. We do our A times our C. Again, if you need that reminder, maybe sneak an A above that 2, a C above that 10. And what is 2 times 10? 20. So that tells us where to look at our factor chart, but we still need to know what we're looking for. And that comes from the adding equation. What do we want it to add up to? Yep, the B. And our B in this case is -9. So on your factor chart, you're going to look at 20. Those of you at home, you can find this factor chart on Schoology. It's at the top of our page. There's a picture of it, and you just click the picture. So we're going to look at 20, and we want two numbers in that 20 that add up to 9. Good, 5 and 4. But 5 plus 4 makes a positive 9. How am I going to make it a negative 9? Yep, both of them are negative. Good. All right, after we find those numbers, what's our next step? Good, to start that area model. So the area model is, or the box method, we're going to do that box. And we're going to fill out the inside first. I always like to do that first box and that last box when I start. So in the first box goes my A term, so the 2, and then this time we're going to keep that x squared. And then our C term goes in the last box. And that's 10. And then what's going to get split between those other two boxes? Yep, the -5 and the -4. And remember that really represents our B. And our B has that x term in it. So we're going to do -5x, -4x. Okay, then we're going to start factoring, taking out that greatest common factor. What we've been noticing is over the last couple weeks, some people are just really good. They're picking each row and each column and factoring each one. Some people are still doing that multiplying. I prefer the multiplying, but you do you. So let's start with 2 and -4. What can we divide both 2 and -4 by? 2. And then do they both have an x? Yep. Okay. 2 times what is 2x squared? 1, and do we need an x here? Yep. Because we have an x squared, or if you look across there, that top row, they all have an x. So now 2 times what would give us -4x? -2. And then for that last column, we can either use the top or the bottom. So what times 1 would give us -5? -5, yep. There's kind of a secret rule. If you would have started with this 5 and 10, if the outside number is negative, you have to factor out a negative. So if you were doing this on your own and you got -2x plus 5 or -1x plus 2, you could switch. It's kind of goofy. All right, we aren't done yet. This is what we did last trimester. This trimester, we still have a couple more steps. So now we're going to group them together. And what's going to be in our first group? Sure, 2x minus 5. And what would go in the second group? The 1x and the 2. And I'm just going to write that as an x minus 2. And what does this equal? 0. So at this point, again, it's up to you. It's your choice. It's your one-pager. At this point, now it's just like the last problem. We have 2 parts that multiply to 0. We need to solve each one. So we're going to break it apart and say 2x minus 5 equals 0. And x minus 2 equals 0. We solve each of those. You guys are really great at solving these, so I'm just going to cruise through. To undo a minus 5, add 5. So 2x equals 5. Hoping you guys have this first part written down because I need to scroll down just a little bit. And then to undo dividing by 2, I'm sorry, we're going to divide by 2. I gave you the answer there. To undo multiplying, we divide. And again, we want to just leave our answer as a fraction. We're good with that. So our first answer is x equals 5 over 2. And then for that second one, how are we going to undo a minus 2? Add 2. So we just get x equals. And I wrote that kind of sloppy because I just really wanted to not have to rewrite it. I just wanted them to be nice next to each other. All right, we have one more example, one last thing to do, and this is from G3. Okay, G3 is all about that quadratic formula. Okay, so last one. And then you'll have time to probably submit your one-pager. You might not have time to start your test before lunch, but you will after lunch. All right, so this one says solve the equation using that quadratic formula. So again, with that quadratic formula, we needed to equal what? Yes. So if you need to make a note by your quadratic formula, if you already wrote something down, it always has to equal 0. And we do that just the same way we did in the last problem. How would we undo that minus 4? A negative 4. So that's the first thing we always want to do with quadratic formula before we even think about the formula itself. We want to check to make sure it equals 0. Okay, so we have 9x squared minus 10x. And then if you want to do that on the calculator, that's fine, but you want to make sure that's a negative 21. I'm not good at 4s and 1s. 7. So minus 17 equals 0. All right, at this point, we're going to use that quadratic formula. If you haven't written it down yet, I suggest writing it down now. If you did write it down, you probably don't have to write it again. So x equals, let me start. That was wrong. X equals opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So at this point, we're just going to put in our numbers. So what is our a? Nine. Good. And what is our b? Negative 10. And what is our c? Negative 17. If you can do that part, that's another 2 points on your test. Awesome. Crushing it, guys. All right, so we're going to start with opposite of b. So our b is negative 10. And what is the opposite of negative 10? Positive 10. So I'm going to start with positive 10 plus or minus. And then we have that really long square root sign. We want that to be all the way over. Yep, good job, Shmarky. Positive 10. If it was a positive, what would we have done? What's the opposite of a positive? A negative. Okay. All right. In that square root, we want to use parentheses. Parentheses are going to really clearly communicate with our calculator. It's going to make sure that we know what we want. So in our first parenthesis, it's b squared. So what is our b? Negative 10 squared minus 4. And then it's our a. So what number is our a? 9. And then our c? Negative 17. And if that line, if you didn't draw it long enough, extend it so it goes over all of that. And then it's all over 2a. So that 2 is always there. And then what is our a? 9, yep. All right, so in our calculator, we're going to do just that inside part of the square root. So I'm not actually going to use the square root sign. We're just going to use the parentheses. Negative 10, parentheses, squared, minus 4 times 9 times negative 17. And we get 712. So at this point, I'm going to break it up into those 2 parts. What are the 2 parts it needs to be broken up into? Yeah, just that plus and that minus. So we're going to do 10 plus square root of 712. That's what we got on the inside there. Over 2 times 9. And over here, we're going to write almost the exact same thing. The only difference is, yep, it's a minus. 10 minus square root of 712 over 2 times 9. We got about 1 more minute yet before lunch. That's just people coming back from lunch, so we got 2 minutes actually. All right, so we got 10 plus square root of 712 over 2 times 9. We're going to use that in our calculator. So I'm going to hit that fraction button first. So on top, I have the 10 in that square root. So 10 plus square root 712 over 2 times 9. So our first answer would be x equals, and do we want it to be 2.03 or 2.04? Well, 0.4. It would round up because of that 7. If rounding is tough for you, this test is not about rounding, so if you need help rounding, please ask. Okay. And then again, what's really nice about Desmos, I don't have to retype that whole thing in. What's the only thing I'm going to change? Yep, going to change that plus to a minus. So we get negative 0 points, and then do I want that to be a 92 or round up to a 93? Yep, 3. All right, that is it for this, and it is lunchtime. When you guys come back from lunch, make sure you submit a picture of your one-pager, and then you can get started on your test. All right, those of you at home, if you want to break for lunch, you can, and then start your test.